Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Parents overwhelmingly want to raise kind children, yet many concerning trends are on the rise, including narcissism and bullying, leaving many parents to worry, how can I improve the likelihood of raising a kind child? And that is why I was delighted to meet with author and journalist Melinda Wenner Moyer. Melinda is a prolific science journalist and blogger and the author of a book addressing our fears with the hilariously titled How to Raise Children Who Aren't Assholes: Science-Based Strategies for Better Parenting from Tots to Teens. I love this book, and raves for it have come far and wide from sources like Wharton professor Adam Grant, CNN.com, and Publishers Weekly, who said Melinda crafts a winning guide for parents who wish to build a better, fairer, stronger world. This delightful mix of strategy and humor shouldn't be missed. I couldn't agree more, and I'm confident you will love learning from her as well. So listen in as Melinda breaks down the science of raising children who are kind and definitely aren't assholes. Melinda Wenner Moyer, a hearty welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm so excited to be here.
I love your book. I mean, you had me at asshole, as I said earlier, and I was so delighted to hear that you were willing to take a really, really courageous approach to basically naming a fear that pretty much all parents have, if indeed our number one hope as parents is to raise kind people. Then you are basically addressing the fear of it, and it's not without basis. It seems like bullying is on the rise, narcissism is on the rise, a whole host of other dark factors on the rise. And I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of the context from which you decided to write this really courageously in your face titled book that made me so happy.
Yes, it really was, as a parent, this was probably back in, it was 2018 when I decided to write the book. So we had Trump as president, and we had a lot going on. And I was thinking about, what are my children seeing in the world right now? What are they learning from? Who are they learning from? And I knew from social learning theory that kids look to adults, and especially adults in power, to gauge what is appropriate behavior. And I also had seen the statistics on bullying, hate crimes on the rise, and narcissism up, empathy down. And I thought, this is a really interesting time to be raising a child, and a terrifying time to be raising a child. And what can I do as a parent to really kind of push back against these bad examples that they might be exposed to and learning from? And basically, what can I do to raise a kid who's not an asshole? And I was talking with other parents, and they were saying they really had this as like the crux of their, it's like their biggest parenting fear was, oh my gosh, I'm going to raise an asshole. I'm going to raise a Trump. How do I make sure I don't do this? So I started looking into whether there was research on this. And I was very relieved to see there's actually a lot of really interesting research in child development on how different characteristics and skills and values develop in kids, and what we as parents can do to really kind of nudge them in the right direction. And so when I saw that there was a lot of research to write about, and some of it was quite surprising, I thought, okay, this I think will be a service to the parents who, like me, are really worried about the world we're raising our kids in, and what we can do to really push them in the direction of being just basically good human beings.
That's wonderful. And one of the highest accolades I could possibly give you is that you are a bona fide science geek. I love that about you. I'm an aspiring science geek. I love science. It matters to me. And this is not mere conjecture from which you wrote this book. You wrote this based on, as you mentioned, social learning theory. And I was wondering if you could share some of the science, including Albert Bandura, social learning theory, Bobo the Clown, all that important stuff that maybe people may have read about in Psych 101, may have forgotten, may not have been exposed to at all. Like, let's hear about the basis from which you wrote this book, which I thought was, as a psychologist, so on point.
Yes. Well, I hope I can get the details right. I have one of those brains that's very good for concepts and not great on details and when it comes to remembering things. But yes, I remember reading about some of Bandura's experiments when I was starting to think about the book. And essentially, there was a series of studies, and I might get some of the details a little bit wrong, but researchers invited kids into a lab and at one point were made to feel frustrated. So I think they offered, I'm trying to remember, I think before this, the kids watched an adult in another room with this doll, playing with this doll. And some of the kids saw adults getting really upset and like hitting the doll and just really abusing this doll. And in other situations, other kids would just see adults sort of playing with this doll, if I recall. I hope I'm getting that.
Playing with, maybe even nurturing. I can't recall either exactly, but I remember it was kind of kind, neutral, or really hostile.
Really hostile towards this doll. And then after that, these kids were offered basically a gift, I think, by the researchers saying, oh, come with me. I'm going to let you have this really cool toy and something like that. And then they set some of the kids up to feel really frustrated. And they said, oh gosh, actually, we're not going to give you this toy that we just promised you. I'm really sorry. It's just the way it is. And they then left the kids with this doll to see what they did with this doll when they were feeling frustrated. And they found that kids who had observed adults abusing, hitting, being violent towards this doll, they were much more likely to do the same thing to the doll when they were frustrated, compared to kids who had seen an adult just playing nicely with that doll. When those kids were made to feel frustrated, they were not nearly as likely to start hitting and abusing this doll. And the take home from this was, wow, it seems that kids really look to adults to figure out what is appropriate behavior in different situations. And so the kids who had seen adults really being mean to this doll, they internalized, I guess it's fine for me to be really violent towards this doll. And so then you can sort of think about, well, more broadly, what does this mean if kids are in a world in which they're seeing all kinds of bad behavior on display and maybe seeing people celebrate bad behavior, as we have maybe been seeing in the last decade or so in the US? What are kids learning from that? Are they learning that, oh, yes, then it's fine for me to bully. It's fine for me to be racist. It's fine for me to be sexist. It's fine for all of these bad things that we, at least I think of as just these terrible things that I would never want to really engage in. I wonder if my kids think it's actually okay because they're seeing adults in power who are really celebrating this kind of behavior.
Yeah. And as a child, I didn't see that. It was recent that, well, let's just talk about this concept that should land with people. That is a cognitive after image. I don't know if you've ever played Tetris, but after I play Tetris, I'm still walking in Tetris. And after I stand in line at It's a Small World, or even hear It's a Small World, I hear it for the rest of the day, whether I want to or not. It's called a cognitive after image. So I drive home, somebody flips me off and cuts me off, and I walk through the door, and I still kind of have this cognitive after image of being cut off and flipped off. And I see my kid, and he's like, "Hi, Daddy." And I say, whatever it is I say. I may still be really nice. I may be able to suppress it. I may be in a slightly gamier mood. Maybe, God forbid, he comes up and he says, "Daddy, can I have such and such?" And my first words are, "Oh, is that all you think about?" rather than being more spacious. So I guess where I'm going is social learning theory, sure, matters to children. It matters really to all of us. We do emulate, we do become. All we need to do is change the soundtrack to the movie of our life or in our mind. I think there's even this, I haven't yet seen it. Oh my gosh. But Melinda, maybe we need to check this out if you haven't. Apparently, there is an alternate version of Die Hard on YouTube with like a rom-com or romantic music in the background, which apparently changes the entire scene. So,
that's amazing. Oh my gosh.
Amazing. And apparently it's hilarious, but it literally changes everything. And one of the reasons Rocky works so well and Star Wars works so well is the great soundtracks of these movies. And yeah, to your point, somebody might say, oh, they don't really matter all that much. Yeah, they do. They matter a lot. We learn from basically how we're prompted. Anyway, we can override it. We can become good. And even if we come from horrible places, it's just a stacking the cards game. Let's talk about something else, though, a theme throughout your entire book, which made me so appreciative. I mean, there's so many reasons why, folks, you've got to read this book. Even if you are an avuncular or an aunt of a presence, you need to understand what she's talking about. It's a perfect book. Basically, talk about the accuracy of naming things as being an important skill in so many contexts throughout the book. Let's talk about that. Why is that so important? And what might be some examples of doing it well versus maybe some misguided, well-intentioned euphemisms or other blunders?
Yeah, there are so many ways in which this plays out in parenting and so many reasons it's important. One of the big themes of the book is that sometimes our parenting instincts are to hold things back from our kids and to sort of shield them from scary or worrying or unpleasant things in the world because we think they're not ready for it. It might be confusing. It give them bad dreams. And we get into this very protective mode as parents, and understandably so. Like, we want to keep our kids safe. But the problem is that when we hold back on really talking about things, naming things, discussing issues that exist in this world, we are really doing our kids a disservice because, first of all, they're exposed to much more than I think we realize. They are maybe online. They are hearing the radio in the background on the school bus. They're hearing their friends and teachers talk about things. They're getting exposed to ideas that we as parents think, oh, we can shield our kids from these entirely. Well, we can't. They're getting exposed. And if we are not making it clear that we're available to talk about these things and also just giving our kids the opportunities to ask questions and to have conversations with us about these issues, then we are potentially allowing our kids to learn about these issues from voices that do not share our values, right? And they're maybe going to get inaccurate information. Basically, I advocate for talking with our kids about kind of everything, things that we don't want to talk to our kids about, whether that's sex, whether that's body parts. So that's a thing we were talking about before the interview about just the importance of using accurate language when we're talking about kids' body parts. And because, first of all, when we don't, we are communicating to our kids that these are things that are taboo, that are bad in some way, that we should be kind of ashamed of maybe our private parts, which is not really a lesson we want to be giving our kids. And we're also preventing them from being able to talk to us if there are issues that they encounter. If they, God forbid, they encounter some kind of sexual abuse, we want them to be able to talk to us about it and talk to other adults about it. And they need this accurate language in order to do that. So yeah, I really advocate for just being much more open with our kids, obviously in developmentally appropriate ways, but talking about our own feelings, talking about our experiences, talking about mistakes we've made, talking about bullying, talking about sex, talking about pornography. I mean, all of these things that we sort of shy away from as parents. I think race, yes, race, gender, yep, sexism, all these things. When we know from the research, when we actually lean into these conversations, we are helping our kids and we are teaching them things that will ultimately make them better human beings.
Could not agree more. I imagine it's both an art and a science to assess the readiness of a child to hear a thing that might be kind of big, whether it's about sex or about race or about really anything. Could even be about money, which can be in some ways a heavy topic for a child. I'm wondering, you give some great guidelines in the book. What are some good guidelines for assessing the readiness of a child to talk about a particular topic? Are there some things that come to your mind regarding that?
I think one way that you can start a conversation in order to sort of gauge where they are in understanding an issue or in just being aware of an issue, for instance, is to just start with open-ended questions with your kids. Like, let's say you're not sure whether you should talk about something that happened in the news. I mean, you could start by saying, have you heard anything about this from your friends? Does this word, mean anything to you? Whether that's abortion, whether it could be something, a big term that you're not sure whether kids are hearing about. And you say, have you ever heard this word? Do you want to know what it means? Do you know what it means? There are a lot of issues where, though, we just sort of knee-jerk assume that our kids don't need to know. And race, for instance, is a big one. I don't think there's an age at which a child is too young to learn about something like race or even something about sexism, because these are things that they are encountering from a young age. And there are ways to talk about these issues that are not scary and that are not going to cause harm to kids, right? You can talk about, I remember interviewing a researcher about pornography, and she said, I advocate for talking to kids about pornography before kindergarten, And at first I was like, how in the world do you talk about pornography with a 4-year-old? And she said, well, it's not that hard. Kids understand nakedness, right? So you can just make it about nakedness and say, sometimes on the internet, there are videos of people who are naked, and it can be kind of confusing if you see that and you don't really understand what it's about or why you're seeing it. And, just make you feel weird. And so if you ever encounter something like that, if you ever stumble across it online, then, I'm here, let's talk about it. But you can take these topics, these issues that I think we as adults, we bring so much baggage to them. And we can simplify them. Like we can present them in ways that are age appropriate to kids. We just have to sort of put some thought into what's sort of the simplest way that I can describe this. It doesn't have to include all of the nitty gritty. It doesn't have to include everything, but it's like you're just really boiling down the concept, right?
It's not a graduate school course on it. It's merely, yeah. It's keeping the information really age appropriate and cognitively, on point for a child. I think that makes so much sense. And I love the idea of early intervention around the conversation itself about race and gender. I think early intervention is good if it's done properly. It's really, really good that message is received early and perhaps often. That these are things that the idea that I don't see color, and you basically explain, actually we do. We see color from a very, very young age, much younger than we would expect, but babies can even see color. One of the things that I also love about this book is you deliver on the promise. You actually give explicit, actionable line items of what a parent can do. I was wondering, what are some of your favorite tips that you offer? There are so many tips that it's not going to give away the entire book. You're not giving away the farm for free. But what are some of your favorite tips in the book?
Sure. So one that I feel like comes up again and again and again, and I have to remind myself of as well, again and again and again.
By the way, already, without even knowing it, I already know I have to remind myself, but keep going.
It involves how we react to our kids' feelings. So it's when my kids are upset, when they are having a meltdown or a tantrum, or just they're angry or sad, my instinct is I want to fix it, right? I want it gone because I hate seeing my kids sad or angry or whatever it is. It makes me very uncomfortable. And so what we sometimes do as parents is we say, oh, you're okay, or it's not a big deal, or why are you crying this much? This is not the end of the world. And we say things sometimes like, stop acting like a girl. I mean, there are all these things that sometimes parents say that are not very constructive, right?
Yes, for real.
And so I do it too. I understand the instinct to do this and why it exists. And we love our kids. We want them to be happy. But ultimately, this really kind of undermines the development of emotional literacy for them. It also really kind of tells them what they're experiencing is not valid, right?
Yep.
So it kind of makes them feel ashamed as well. Like, oh my gosh, mom tells me I shouldn't be sad. Something must be wrong with me that I feel so sad. Sorry, I'm giving the what not to do. But really the tip I give is just let your kids have those feelings and be there for it. You don't have to hug them while they're having a tantrum, but show them that these feelings are okay. These are part of the human experience. These are natural. And talk about feelings. And there's really interesting research links parent conversations about feelings and labeling feelings. Again, getting to your point of the accuracy of labeling things, labeling the specific feelings that kids have and talking about them. There's really interesting research linking that to the development of generosity and helpfulness in kids. Because, I mean, it makes sense in order to, let's say, help a friend who is in need, who is sad or upset or frustrated. You have to be able to look at them and perceive what they're feeling, right? Through their body language, through their facial expressions. And you have to figure out, you have to understand, okay, well, if my friend is frustrated, I think my friend's frustrated, what could I do to make them feel better versus sad versus embarrassed? The way that you can be generous and helpful as a person when somebody's upset, it depends on the emotion that they're feeling. And so you really want to help your kids develop an understanding of what different emotions look and feel like. And the best way to do that is to let them have their own feelings and to talk about them, essentially.
I could not agree more. You talk a lot about what you call emotional literacy, and we'll get into that in a sec. But being able to use yourself as a sounding board for what might that feel like is the starting point for empathy. And being able to accurately name emotions. I was thinking about my first TEDx talk was all about men and emotions, called Emotions, the Data Men Miss. Now, virtually every woman and even people who do not identify with the gender say, this is a talk for me too. And I said, of course it is. I was just going for my guys initially. I tell a story about being in that exact situation. I was in Jerry Shapiro, one of my favorite graduate school professors' office, trying to figure out like, what's the story I include? And just as a throwaway, I told him about, last night I was in my son's room and oh my God, his beloved goldfish Ari had just died and I couldn't make it better. It was the first time in my life that I literally could offer nothing except empathy and just be there with him as he was going through his feels, which he went all the way through. And he said, "That's your story." And I said, "Holy smokes, you're right." I asked my son, Bren, I said, "Is it okay if I use your story in my talk?" And he said, "Absolutely." And so I use that as a story, but identifying accurately, with accuracy, our own feelings is so important. Not being told, don't feel that way, or someone from your gender shouldn't feel that way, or from your age, be more mature, be more, it's like, please, no, we have our human feelings. And from that, we can develop more empathy. So let's talk about emotional literacy as it relates to not being a bully, as being maybe a more upright citizen, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. The research on bullying is very interesting, by the way. There's so much more nuance to bullying than I think than we give it when we think about it, right? As a parent, for me anyway, I used to think, oh, bullies are this like certain type of person who they're just nasty people. They want to hurt other people. I just had these ideas that were not accurate, right? And we now know that kids can bully for so many reasons, but one reason is that they really just lack a skill that is known as theory of mind, which is essentially the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And this is a skill that develops throughout childhood. It takes a while, and for some kids, it develops sooner than others. But I mean, it makes a lot of sense that there are some kids who engage in bullying and they think they're trying to be funny, they're trying to be witty, or they're trying to perform in some way. And they're really just not connecting with how is this affecting that other person. They just have trouble bridging that gap and they don't recognize what it feels like. So this is a really important part of emotional literacy, is developing that ability to take someone else's perspective. And I talk a lot in the book about how to help kids develop theory of mind, because it really is like the foundation for so many other behaviors that we want to see in kids, like generosity and helpfulness and compassion. And it's something that I'm always trying to think of ways to help my kids develop it. And so it's as simple sometimes as just identifying situations in which your kids are having trouble doing this. So like I remember once my son, he came home from the school bus and he was so upset because the school bus driver told him he was being too loud on the bus. And he was like, the bus driver was just trying to be mean. And I don't understand why being loud matters. He's not talking to anybody. Why does my voice matter? And we sat down and I said, well, let's think about what the bus driver's job is and what it's like to be a bus driver. And we really just sort of walked through, what's he doing? He's trying to get all of you kids home safely. And so that means he has to concentrate. And what do you need in order to concentrate? Oh, silence is helpful, or at least like not screaming children in the background. Anyway, we went through like this whole scenario of like, what is it like to be a bus driver, to help him take the perspective of the bus driver. And by the end of that, he said, okay, now I kind of get why me screaming in the background loudly may have been made his job harder. I'll give one more tip actually for theory of mind.
Love that one, by the way, so much.
Anytime your kid, and it happens so frequently, it happens with siblings all the time, where they're like, she's just trying to make my life difficult, or she's just trying to distract me. And I think, well, maybe she wants to play with you. Maybe she's bored. Like, let's think about what she might be feeling. Those opportunities can be so helpful. And one other way that I talk about helping kids build theory of mind is really asking them to do something, really trying to give the why of why you're asking them to do something. And especially if that why involves other people. So one example I talk about in my book is my kids leave Legos everywhere. And I'm often asking them to clean up their Legos. And I mean, the reason I'm asking them to clean up their Legos is often because I don't want to step on one. Everybody steps on a Lego with a bare foot and it really hurts.
It really
and so instead of, it's terrible.
A lot of nerves down there on the bottom of our feet. And those Legos are sharp. Anyway, keep going.
They really are.
I totally agree. I just felt it.
So now when I ask my kids to clean up their Legos, I don't just say, hey, would you please clean up your Legos? Which is fine. But I will always try to give the rationale, because otherwise I'm going to step on one and it's going to really hurt. And when you do, connect the dots that way, and this is called induction, is the form of discipline where you're really like giving rationale behind what your requests are. You are helping kids understand that they are part of this bigger whole, that their choices, their actions have effects on other people. And this does not always come naturally to little kids. They're very egocentric. They're thinking about what they want and not what anybody else wants or how their behavior is going to affect anybody else. And so you're really finding opportunities to make that clear to them, to say, actually, you singing really loudly in the school bus does affect other people. And here's how it affects other people. Or your Legos on the floor could affect me in a way that would be really unpleasant. And I really don't want to hurt my foot again, because it's really unpleasant. So it's like finding these ways in which you can just connect whatever, I guess, help your kids understand that their choices, their behaviors have these effects on other people. Finding ways to make that clear to them can be really useful.
And I love the idea that the universe is not fair, but it has consequences. And I'm thinking about two things, solipsism and Simon Sinek, both beginning with the letter S. Solipsism is pretty much the opposite of having theory of mind and empathy and just basically thinking, I am the only sentient being on the planet, versus, wow, other people have thoughts and feelings too, such as the bus driver. And I'm in conflict with that bus driver because I want to be loud, but the bus driver wants to keep us safe. Let's think about the moral development as it unfolds in our life. Well, whose need here might be more important? Maybe the bus driver's need might be more important. And that's a real important part of neural development. And then I'm thinking about Simon Sinek in terms of the induction piece, the ability to link phenomenon with a rationale. This is the dumbest, most hilarious study he cited in one of his TED Talks. I don't recall which one. I think it was actually let's start with why. There were 3 groups of people back in the day of copy machines at a college campus. And their goal, they were the subjects, was to get ahead in line. And they could say one of 3 things. Either, excuse me, I have a class in like 3 minutes. Can I cut ahead of you? That was group 1. Group 2 said, can I cut ahead of you? And group 3 said, can I cut ahead of you because I need to make copies? Which is the most hilarious thing I think I've ever heard in my life. Because what else is everybody doing in line? So groups 1 and 3 were the ones who got ahead because each of them linked it with a phenomenon ascribing need and cause and effect. And as dumb as the idea of, I need to get ahead of you because I need to make copies. I mean, that is ostensibly the dumbest thing I've heard in my entire life. And it's hilarious. And it worked because there was being able to say, hey, listen, don't just leave your Legos out. Okay, that's one thing. Don't leave your Legos out because mommy's feet could get hurt. Far more likely that they will comply. Yesterday, my son he was smoking some meat in the backyard on my smoker, and he didn't put the cover back on. I just said, please put the cover back on, but I didn't explain to him why. So I will be borrowing from you and Simon Sinek next time you leave something unattended. And that way, like, do this because of this.
Yeah. And I feel like it can come out in other conversations too, like just explaining your own rationale for why you're deciding certain things as parents. Like yesterday, so my son and I were watching, and my husband too, we're all watching Ted Lasso together. It's such a great show. Oh, there's so many things that it ties into with my book, but like we will pause it when there are, as an example, I think I don't know why this particular example is popping into my head, but when Keely is putting in a tampon, for instance, and I paused it and I said, do you know what's going on in this scene? And my son was like, no. And I said, great, let's talk about this. He knows about periods and whatnot, but like, I was like, this is what a tampon is. And so we have these great moments where we pause it and talk about things, and we talk about mental health, and we talk about sportsmanship and all these things. But sorry, I'm getting away from the original point, which was he really wanted to watch one of the episodes last night. And my husband and I are super busy right now. We're in the midst of a house renovation. And so I said, I'm really sorry, bud, we don't have time to watch it tonight. And he was like, oh, and I said, well, let me explain why. Here's what's going on. We have to pick out tile for 3 bathrooms, like in the next 24 hours. And it's really stressful for us. And I'm really sorry. We'd love to watch it with you. But like, he was so much less sad when we gave him that rationale. And we said, here's why we would love to do this. But like, we have a lot of things that demands on our time right now. And we just can't make room for it. And it really helped him like understand, oh yes, okay, you have stuff going on. You have needs right now. And those might be maybe a little more pressing.
I love that idea. And one of the things that I've done throughout my children's life to help inculcate better emotional literacy has been to hit the pause button on the remote and say, like, let's say we're watching My Neighbor Totoro. What is May feeling here? What is the dad feeling? What is the mom feeling?
Yep.
Just really, really asking what might they be feeling. And it's a really good idea to ask. That was a really grumpy person who serviced frozen yogurt. What could have been going on in that person's life?
Yes.
But let's talk about one of the things that you really advocate. And I love that you name these accurately, because oftentimes I hear about somebody describing an authoritarian parent as an authoritative parent, a very common misnomer. But it's important that we know the difference. The authoritarian is the one who says, do as I do, not as I say. And we all know that doesn't work. The authoritative one is more kind coach, more of a Ted Lasso, like, hey, I'm on your team. Permissive, like, hey, it's not my child's my best friend. Let's go get matching tattoos and get drunk in Cabo. Well, maybe not when they're 16. Not a great idea.
Yeah.
Sending a very odd message there. But I guess where I'm going with this is one of the things, whether it's hitting the pause button on Ted Lasso and talking about it, or introducing them to tech, or virtually anything else, you seem to advocate kind of a co-pilot approach, like sitting next to the person, looking at the thing and having a thoughtful, intelligent conversation about the thing. And that's one of my favorite tips throughout the book. No matter what the topic is, being an ally, a partner with your child as you're thinking through a complex problem or situation.
You're right. That is a theme that I think comes up throughout my book. We all have, I think, so many different goals as parents. I certainly want my kids to feel like they can talk to me about anything, because when they encounter something scary or when they do something, make a really big mistake, the last thing I want is for them to feel that they have to hide this from me, which could just make it worse and worse and worse, right? So it is really important to me as a parent to build a lot of trust and be a person that my kids feel like they can come to with anything. And mom might be a little upset, but she's going to understand, sort of thing. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to, from a very young age, really treat your kid as a kind of collaborator. I mean, this doesn't mean that you have equal standing. You're still the parent. You're still in charge. This isn't permissive parenting, but respecting your child does so much for them, right? And treating them with warmth. It's so important for the development of self-esteem. I mean, just having your child know that like they are an autonomous human and you respect that and you respect their input, even if they don't always get their way. Sometimes you have to say, I do know best in this situation. We're going to do X. But yeah, I think it's just incredibly helpful and important to treat your kids with respect and to be open to talking about pretty much anything with them and to show them that you're open to talking about pretty much anything with them. I think benefits everyone down the line. And I think it's also kind of an important pillar of autonomy supportive parenting, which I'm a big fan of as well. That's essentially parenting in a way where kids develop the sense of agency and develop independence. It's like being collaborative, but also letting our kids take charge in some areas and letting them make mistakes and letting them flail a little bit. It's kind of all connected.
And at the end of the day, it sounds like they know that I can face plant and I'll be safe with my parents, even with something that might cause shame in another household. I'll just maybe be a little bit embarrassed and feel maybe a little bit guilty, but I will come back to such an important differentiation between shame and guilt. The idea that guilt is I feel bad for what I did and shame is I feel bad for who I am. What you're suggesting really increases the likelihood of guilt being there, but not shame, and people being able to work through it and it having a much shorter half-life and it being a growth opportunity rather than a permanent blemish.
Right. I mean, this is really what discipline should be, right? It should be teaching. That's what word comes from. And I think all too often, I
never thought about that. Sorry.
Yes, disciple.
It's amazing. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Right. It should really ultimately be about teaching. And as we know too, when kids are feeling ashamed, when they feel shame, they are also less able to listen, less able to learn. Right. And so when our kids when they make mistakes, because all kids they make mistakes all the time. The goal really should be to help them understand what happened, right? Help them maybe understand why their choice wasn't the most constructive choice, but in a way that is not making them feel ashamed. So that's just going to make them pull away from you. And just it's like problem solving. It's sort of saying, okay, this happened this time. Let's think about what we could do next time that might end up working a little bit better. And also, I think when we don't react in a way that's going to cause shame, it just means that kids are going to come to us with their problems and with their issues sooner because they know that we will react in a way that doesn't make them feel ashamed, right? It sort of makes sense. And so my daughter the other day, she spilled, I think, chocolate all over her shirt. And she said, Mom, I need to tell you this because I know that it's helpful for you to be able to put the stain remover on quickly. So I'm just going to tell you that I spilled chocolate all over my shirt a few minutes ago. And I mean, I just think of an alternative reality where if I was going to scream at her every time she tells me that she spills things on her shirts, then she's going to stop telling me she spills things on her shirts. But she was like, I know that you need to know this in order to fix the problem, and you're not going to get really mad at me. And so I said, thank you for telling me. I know that was probably hard for you to tell me. I'm not mad. Everybody spills things. And now we can get your shirt clean. And that's a win-win for everybody. So it's really trying to think through, like, what's the best way for me to react in this moment to both maybe teach something to my kids and also to reinforce the kind of behavior I like to see, right? So I'm appreciative that she told me that she spilled the chocolate. That's better. And so I thank her for that instead of getting mad at her for spilling the chocolate.
It's such a template. It's such a boilerplate. It's such a good metaphor for other possible phenomena that are going to come down the pike. Dealing with things when they're small is so much easier than when they grow big and out of control. I remember seeing an advertisement where you basically see a Godzilla-like monster and it says, wouldn't it have been better if we could have just dealt with this when it was the size of a tiny lizard? And chocolate milk on a sweater is a tiny lizard. It's very small and we can deal with that. When it becomes something like she holds on to something for 6 months and it's festering, causing a wall between the two of you and possibly problems for her in other domains. Oh my gosh, is that the kind of world that we want to raise our children in? And the answer, I would hope, would be no.
It's really thinking about the big picture here, as you're saying, because in the moment, yes, we might be upset that there's chocolate on the shirt, but how we respond in those little moments that we have every day with our kids can really set the stage for how they think about problems, how they engage with different kinds of issues, how they talk with you about things. I mean, it just can be very big in the end.
What's interesting, safety and self-compassion are two big words that seem to show up a lot. Safety, for example, like at companies that really engender safety, they tend to be more creative. They tend to be more ahead of the curve as it comes to innovation. Safety leads to innovation and self-compassion leads to everything. I mean, Ted Lasso could just be called self-compassion in action and compassion to others in action. I was speaking with probably one of the most important clinical appliers of self-compassion. That would be Christopher Germer, one of my most popular episodes ever. And he said, basically, if you are in graduate school and you want to have publishable results, just correlate self-compassion with any good outcome and you will probably get it.
Wow.
And Steve Kerr himself considers compassion to be one of his winning elements. So if we think good guys can't win, look at Steve Kerr, who's got, I believe, 4 NBA rings on his and so many attendance to so many championships. So let's just, he's more than that because he is a player. Oh, he has like nearly 9 rings or something in total. I don't know. It's a bonkers number, one of the highest in history. And compassion is right there. So what you were doing with your daughter really is creating safety, creating self-compassion. And I would think that children's assholery may be misdirected anger that they feel or due to the lack of safety and compassion within the household. And so what do? They do it to others. And I think that if you create a culture of safety and self-compassion, like what you're describing, the likelihood of children engaging in those asshole-like behaviors is far lower.
I think so. I mean, and a lot of it too is just modeling the behavior you want to see in your kids, right? So if you are somebody who reacts to bad information with empathy and, calmness, then that is what your kids are learning as to how to respond to difficult situations. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like, how would I want my child to respond in a situation that makes them upset? Do I want them to scream? Do I want them to throw things? No, I don't. I want them to take deep breaths and say, okay, let's figure this out together.
Before we close, let's talk about sibling rivalry. And part of raising good kids is being in relationship and feeling less of a threat associated with sibling rivalry and conflicts between siblings. What are some of your favorite tenets as they relate to those?
Boy, it's hard. It's hard being a parent of kids who fight. It's really hard to listen to. Again, I think sometimes our instincts do not serve us well. For instance, my instinct when my kids are screaming is to shut it down, to basically send the message that conflict is not okay. Like, stop it, stop fighting. I don't want to hear it, right? Because we don't like hearing it. Or we jump in and we become a referee. And maybe we don't understand what the situation really calls for, but we say, give the ball to your sister right now. I don't care what's happening. Just give the ball to your sister. Making these assumptions about who's right and who's wrong, quote unquote. So these are very natural responses, but ultimately I think they are not sending very helpful messages to our kids. Because first of all, conflict is a part of life and our kids are going to have to learn how to navigate it. And when we shut down these fights and when we threaten our kids if they're fighting, we're robbing them of opportunities to learn how to manage conflict. We're just taking practice away that could be very, very useful for them. And when we jump in and referee, again, this can cause resentment if we're choosing in favor of one kid over the other. So what I advocate for, and there's really interesting research on this, is really to kind of step in as a mediator. And we can't do this all the time. It can be time consuming, but when we have time and when our kids are fighting and when we're not in the midst of some other crisis we're dealing with as parents, it can really help to sort of come in and say, okay, first of all, acknowledge the feelings you're hearing. It sounds like you're upset. I'm hearing a lot of angry voices in here. Let's see if we can figure this out. And you really kind of give each child the opportunity to say what's happening from their perspective in front of the other child. And that is so valuable for teaching theory of mind because, again, a lot of kids will think my perspective is what happened and that's the only perspective there is. And then they hear their sibling say something and they think, oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, I didn't realize that that's how you saw it or that's what you were trying to do. And it can really be this light bulb moment for kids to recognize, oh,
that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. And once you've given each child the chance to say what's happened, that in itself is very powerful and often can encourage kids to want to compromise more. But then you kind of, if you need to, you help with that brainstorming. You say, okay, so here's the situation. Here's what each of you thought. You can kind of repeat back what you heard. And then say, well, what do you think would be a good way to solve this? What might be a good compromise? And you kind of let them come up with ideas. You might throw out a few too if they're having trouble. But I have found that this approach, when I've used it, it's been remarkable how helpful it is. Because I was skeptical. I was like, no, my kids are still going to be like, no, she's wrong. I'm right. End of story. It really helps them to have heard the other child's perspective in that way. And often they say, okay, well, how about then you have a turn with it for now? And then in 10 minutes, how about I have a turn and that? And they really come to an agreement a lot faster. And when I use that too regularly, I find that my kids will often recognize when they're about to fight about something. They'll sort of say, oh, there's a conflict here, right? And then they will stop and try to come to a compromise before the fight even erupts. And that is really magical when that happens. So this is what I advocate for. Again, it's not something you can do every time your kids fight, but if you do it every so often, your kids really kind of remember it and learn from it.
I love that idea. And it relates to so many other phenomena that take longer at the outset and maybe the first several times, but eventually over time, pay back with compounding interest and dividends because there are just so many good things that happen. They begin to develop agency. They actually come to rely upon you less and work it out. But the mediation approach, or if it's teaching them how to make their own lunch or any other skill that is age appropriate, we've got some winners. My final question. If you had the magical power to confer upon all human beings one insider skill that would dramatically improve the lives of individuals or perhaps even society at large, what would that insider skill be? And what do you imagine would be the impact on the individual and perhaps even society?
Wow, that's a good question.
It's a big one.
It is. I would say empathy. I think if we all had a lot of empathy, and some people have more than others just naturally or because of how they were parented or who knows, but if we could all have a lot of empathy, and in that comes some theory of mind as well, the ability to really think about other people's perspectives and experiences. Oh my goodness. I think we would have a lot fewer wars. Mm-hmm. And I think the polarization we have in our country would be a lot less. I just think there would be so much less conflict, right? Because we could sit and think about why another person is behaving a certain way or why another person was in the situation that they're in. And we would respond in a way that would be just so much more constructive.
Amen, sister. My interview with Daryl Davis, who actually got well over 200 men out of the KKK. He himself is African American. And for him, through you drawing on empathy and the willingness to communicate, he got them to volunteer their robes and say, this is not who I am, actually. So empathy, really, it starts there. It may only lead to internal insight on your behalf, but it may actually go both ways and have some type of symbiotic, synergistic effect. So, love what you shared. I'm so grateful to you for writing this book. It's fantastic. I'd say it'd be on my short list of required reading for all parents and anybody dealing with children in any capacity, grandparents, teachers. It's timely. Thank you so much for sharing your brain, your wisdom in the book and with my listeners on this podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. That means so much coming from you. And it was a real pleasure chatting with you.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.